Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Okay, today we're going to take a look at Dominion Adventures, the newest expansion for Dominion. Now, famously, the designer of Dominion, Donald X. Vaccarino, had said that the last one, which I believe was Guilds, was it either Guilds or Dark Ages was the last set, and that was going to be the last set, the last expansion for Dominion. Psych! Of course not, of course not. They're going to keep milking this thing until people stop buying it, which is not anytime soon, so you can hardly blame them in that instance. If you're not familiar with Dominion, you have to be familiar with Dominion. You probably are, but if you're not, it's a deck building game, the first deck building game upon which all others have basically been built upon. There's technically was deck building games before that, where you started off with a crappy hand of cards, bought brand new cards, and built your deck, and that was the entire game. That's what you were doing, was just building your deck and seeing who got the most victory point cards during that. And Dominion is a very generic one in the sense that the theme is just you're in medieval times and trying to, not the cool medieval times dinner and show, but just you're in medieval times and trying to build your kingdom and getting different cards. And it's still one of the most restrictive deck building games because unlike games like Ascension or the DC Deck Builder, there's no randomized lineup and you don't get unlimited buys and get as many plays and powers as you want. It's the ABC system. One action, one buy, and then a cleanup phase, and that's it. And unless you play more cards to get you, or play cards to give you more actions and more buys, and so on, just have lots and lots of combos. For that reason, a lot of Eurogamers love this more than any other deck building game because of that restrictiveness, because it feels much more strategic, because you have the cards that you're going to buy are set at the beginning of the game, and that's all that you have. Now, I never actually did a full review of Dominion, and I previously owned the game and got rid of it. And this is going to be a common theme together with the review that's going up together with this for Temple of Elemental Evil, but I felt that I had moved on from it. It was a fun game. I liked it. It started me on my one of the major games that got me into hobby board gaming a few years ago, but I played so many other deck builders I just thought were much, much better, including DC Deck Builder. I know that sounds like blasphemy, but that game was just faster and had a better theme. Maybe I just like the artwork better and just worked better for me, and I didn't know that I would ever revisit Dominion after that. Then I got to thinking about it, and it was time to do a new top 10 deck building games list, and I'm like, maybe I should revisit Dominion. People give me crap for not putting it on the list, and lo and behold, the Adventures expansion was on its way out, and people were giving it rave reviews, saying that it added a lot of cool stuff to the game, so I decided to give it a shot. I bought the base cards expansion just so I'd have enough cards to play the expansion by itself with those base cards, and now we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. There's a lot of new stuff in this set. I'll just go ahead and tell you about it in the overview. Alright, let me just show you some of the new stuff that comes in Dominion Adventures. Now, aside from cards, the game actually comes, or the expansion I should say, actually comes with some new cardboard bits here. Well, first off, I'll say that these tokens are going to be used for specific cards, and I'll cover a few of those as we go through the rest of this this overview. But for instance, this one of the cards, at least one of the cards, I think the raid event is going to make you put this token on top of your deck potentially, which says that when you would draw a card, instead you draw one less and just get rid of this token. Kind of the same thing with this money token. When you would gain money, you get one less and then get rid of this. All the rest of these tokens are again going to be used for specific cards, and you have one of note is the Journey token, which gets used for a lot of cards, and usually has we'll usually say if the token is face up and it starts face up, you get this. If the token is face, and then you turn it face down, and if it's face down, you get this and flip it the other way. Things like that. So we'll cover a few of those different types of cards a little bit later. Now, this is very interesting. This is your tavern mat, and this is going to be specifically used for a new type of card that is in the game called reserve cards. And reserve cards have a different type of border, and I'll say reserve on the bottom. And how this works, and I'll cover the reserve cards in a minute, is that when you would play a reserve card as an action, they're all action cards, just like normal action cards, you put it onto your tavern mat, and you will get whatever the normal effect of the card is, but then on a later turn, or perhaps right away, you can call the card. Calling in this case is taking the card off of the mat and then using it for its call ability and then putting it into your discard pile. So it's kind of putting the card into reserve until you want to use its other ability at a later point. And what are those abilities? Well, let's get to those. Now, there's a lot of different reserve cards in this set, but I just want to go over a few I thought were most interesting. The one I was just using as an example when I showed you the Tavern Mat is Duplicate. And how this works is very simply, this one doesn't actually have an ability when you play it the first time. You simply put it onto your Tavern Mat. But then, when you would gain a card that costs up to 6, you can call this in order to gain a copy of that card. So if this is already on your Tavern Mat, and you would gain a card that costs up to 6, which means you're not going to be able to get provinces, unfortunately, you can just discard this card into your discard pile and then take another copy of that card, which can be quite powerful if you do it right. Then you have the Wine Merchant that gives you +1 buy and +4 money when you purchase, or when you first play him, and then you put him on your Tavern Mat. Now, the way that this one works is that you don't get another special effect later on. Instead, the Wine Merchant is essentially kind of trapped. You've employed him, and you put him on your Tavern Mat. Now you have to pay to recall him. So on a later turn, you can spend 2 money, or you can, or the way it's worded is you can maintain at least 2 money that you haven't spent at the end of your turn, and then you can put him back into your discard pile. So you get a really great effect the first time you play him, and then you'll have to pay a smaller amount later to get him back, essentially. Transmogrify gives you +1 action when you play it, and then you put it on your Tavern Mat. And then in the future, you can choose at the start of your turn, so you have to at least wait until your next turn to play this, to call it, I should say. You can call this card and then trash a card from your hand, and then take another card that costs 1 more, or up to 1 more, from the kingdom, and then put it immediately into your hand. You're literally transforming one of the cards in your hand. And this one is really one of my favorites. This is Distant Lands, and this is a victory point card, but how this one works is that it costs you 5, and you only get 4 victory points, which isn't great, but when you get it on a future, when you draw it on a future turn, you can place it onto your Tavern Mat, which means that you get points, but you're able to mill them out of your deck, which is great. You don't have to worry about them clogging up your deck too much if you start buying them early in the game. So event cards are another type of card that can come out into your kingdom. However, they are not kingdom cards. They don't count against your 10 kingdom cards that you're allowed to have in the kingdom. Instead, you kind of decide at the beginning of the game how many you would like to do. The book recommends 2, but if you do more than that, it can get kind of crazy and chaotic. It's a lot to worry about, so 2 is probably the best thing to do. And the way you can do this is either just grab 2 at random from the deck, or you can put shuffle some of them into the normal randomizer deck, which means there's a chance that you won't get however many events you're limiting yourself to. By that I mean that whenever you draw a kingdom card, you put it out. If you draw an event card, you put that out. But there's, well, anyways, it's just a possibility of however you want to randomize it, you can decide how many events you want to have. So how these work. Event cards, there's only 1 card of every event in the game, and these will stay out on the table and never go anywhere. You can never gain an event. It never goes into your deck. Instead, you can choose as a buy, which means it counts as your buy. It means you can do more of them if you have more buys. You can pay the cost and then do the event. You can do whatever the effect on the event card is, and in fact, you can do it multiple times, the same one multiple times, as long as you have the money and as long as you have the buys to do so. So for instance, here's Raid, which is kind of an attack but not really classified as an attack. This one says that you get to gain a silver for everyone that you have in play, and then each player takes that -1 card token and puts it on top of their deck. So that can be kind of brutal. You have the Quest card, which says that this one costs 0. You can discard an attack, 2 curses, or 6 cards, and if you do, you gain a gold. So that can be, but again, it does at least cost you a buy in order to do that. You have Pilgrimage, which is a little bit complicated. Once per turn, you can turn your Journey token. Remember, the Journey token is the boot token here. You can turn that token over. It starts face up. Then if it's face up, you choose up to 3 differently named cards you have in play and gain a copy of each. Because you have to keep flipping it over, that means you can't necessarily use that special effect all the time, but you can charge up for it at a later point. You have Expedition, which costs you 3. You can just draw 2 extra cards for your next hand. And you have Bonfire, which very simply lets you trash up to 2 cards that you have in play. Oh, let me tell you about one more, I guess. You have the Ball, which is you can take your -1 money token, which is one of these little tokens over here that I'm struggling to find right now at the moment. But you take your -1 money token and gain 2 cards, each costing up to 4. So you're going to be penalized for that, but there it is. But fortunately, you get to gain 2 cards costing up to 4 at the same time. Now let me tell you about another new thing in this set. So Adventures has cards that essentially level up. There's only 2 of them. There's the Peasant and the Page, and these go into the kingdom as normal, and you can purchase them as normal. However, their upgraded versions will never be in the kingdom. Instead, whenever you would discard any card, except for the last card in the tree, then you would immediately get to gain the next better version of that card. So the Page will transform into the Treasure Hunter, will transform into the Warrior, will transform into the Hero, will transform into the Champion, who happens to be a duration card, which is another thing they're actually bringing back in this set. So while her lowly form as the Page is just +1 card and +1 action, as the Champion, she's a duration card that stays in play for the entire game and gives you +1 action when you first play her, and whenever you get an action in the future, or play an action in the future, you get another action. So you basically have as many actions as you want, and she also prevents you from being attacked. Whereas the Peasant has slightly different abilities. The Peasant will start off giving you +1 buy and +1, and then the Peasant turns into a soldier, then turns into a fugitive for some reason. I'm sure there's a story there. Then he turns into a disciple, and then the final version is the Teacher, which is actually a reserve card, which is a new thing in this set that I just covered before. And what he does is at the start of your turn, you may call this. Remember, that's removing it from your tavern mat to move your +1 card, +1 action, +1 buy, or +1 token to an action supply pile you have no token on. When you play a card from that pile, you first gain that bonus. That's how those little tokens are going to work. So that is just a cool little thing they add to the game. Those are actually called Traveler cards. That's the proper name for them. I mentioned before that duration cards were back. These were originally in the expansion Seaside, and how these work is that you'll play them as a normal action, and then they'll hang around for a while. It might be the rest of the game, but usually it's still the start of your next turn. Essentially what will happen is you play it, you get an effect, and then you'll get a secondary effect, at which point you'll discard the card. So it is kind of tough to remember to actually play these and get their secondary effect. We recommend putting the card on top of your deck. Haunted Wood says until your next turn, when any other player buys a card, he puts his hand on top of his deck in any order. At the start of your next turn, you get +3 cards. The Swamp Hag, until your next turn, when any other player buys a card, he gains a curse. And at the start of your next turn, you get +3 money. The Bridge Troll, each other player takes their -1 token, which would be this happy fellow here. Now at the start of your next turn, you also get +1 buy. While this is in play, though, cards cost you 1 less, no less than 0. You can't gain money for buying a card. And then finally, the coolest one that everyone tries to buy right away is the Hireling card. It stays in play forever, and so long as it does, you get +1 card at the start of your turn. Now, there are a lot of cards in this set, and there are, of course, quote-unquote normal cards. So here's the normal action cards. Lost City gets you +2 cards and +2 actions, and when you gain this, each other player draws a card because of how good it is. The Giant card is a little bit complicated. He's going to use the Journey token. How this will work is that you turn your Journey token over. It starts face up. If it's face down, you get +1 money. But if it's face up, you get +5. And each player reveals the top card of his deck and trashes it if it costs from 3 to 6. If that doesn't happen, they instead, if that's not the case, they discard it and gain a curse. So either way, very, very bad. One of my favorites, the Ranger. You get +1 buy and turn your Journey token face over. And if it starts face up. If it's face up, you get +5 cards, which is just great. And the Messenger, also really good. +1 buy, +2 money, and you may put your deck into your discard pile. When this is your first buy in a turn, you gain a card costing up to 4, and each other player gains a copy of it. So there's a downside there, but otherwise it's still a pretty cool card. And lastly, there's actually a couple of new treasures in this game, which are pretty interesting. You have the Relic, which is actually an attack card as well. It gives you 2 money, and when you play this, each other player puts his -1 card token up top of his deck. And then the Treasure Trove, which is a very risky card, because when you play it, you get 2 money. Okay, that's fine. And you also gain a gold, fantastic, and a copper. So it's very easy to load your deck up with copper by playing this game. But that is just a smattering of the new cards. Believe me, there's a lot of cards we didn't go over in this new Adventures expansion for Dominion. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Well, I always start off talking about theme and components, and those are pretty interesting things to talk about as far as Dominion goes, because theme-wise, that was always one of the biggest complaints that I had about Dominion, and it's one of the reasons why I moved on from it, was because there is no theme to it. You're not really doing, you never feel like you're doing much of anything, and it really feels, even though the term the phrase "pacing on theme" is overused in today's hobby really applies here. So I can't really say anything good or bad about it. I guess it's bad that there's a lack of it, but it's just there. You're never, I think that's one of the reasons why this is such a great gateway game, is because it's not a theme that anyone's going to have a strong opinion on because it's not really there. Going on to the components, I mean, the card quality is okay. I do think that they're a little bit worse quality than some other deck builders I'm used to playing, and that's probably why so many people sleeve all of their Dominion cards, although that's a tall order if you have all of the expansions. As far as like the new tokens that come with the adventure set in particular, those are fine, decent quality. But the artwork on the cards is interesting because it's a mixture of pretty good art, okay art, and terrible artwork. It's all over the place. They've used a lot of different artists. Interestingly enough, Ryan Lockett of Red Raven Games, who did some of my favorite games, designer, publisher, artist, did some of the artwork for this set. I didn't know if I guess he did art in previous sets as well, because some of my base cards had him as the artist, and his art is probably the best art in the whole set. There's some other art that's really good as well, but some of it is just garbage, just totally bad. I don't know how that made it through to this day and age for such a high-profile game. Nevertheless, moving on to the gameplay. Now, I had mentioned before that I left Dominion behind quite a while ago, but I have to say, revisiting it again, it was like I never left. I really had a good time playing with this set, and I'm not sure if it's just because I have played a lot of other deck building games and kind of wanted to course correct. Like, I played a lot of wild ones with really crazy rules, sometimes really overly complicated, and getting back to basics felt really good in a sense. But also, I think that the cards, particularly in Dominion Adventures, are way more interesting than I ever remember playing with. I never played with like every expansion for Dominion, but I played some of the stuff. I played some Seaside cards, and I played the base set, and I think I played with some Intrigue stuff as well. And maybe I just didn't have the right alignment, but the stuff in Adventures just seems so much cooler and so many different neat things that you can do that I felt way more engaged in this time around with Dominion. I love the reserve cards. I love the idea of it, being able to stow those cards away, using them at the appropriate time, which might be never, but it's interesting that one of my favorite is the victory point card that just sits there, but it's great because it's victory points that you don't have to worry about clogging up your hands. And I love the duplicate card and the transmogrify card, which lets you trash cards, always a fantastic thing in any deck builder, but especially Dominion, and get an actual better card. You can't get rid of your coppers that way, but you can get rid of your estates. You can make cards that were just okay at a certain point, like maybe the dungeon card, and make that into a much better card. So I love that. I wish there were more of them, but I do love the traveler cards, the transforming cards. They're not that great, but they're just a cool concept. I want to see more and more and more of those. I love that idea of swapping them out. This kind of gives me a hint of what was going on in Ascension with the transforming heroes and constructs, which could just get better when certain conditions were met. It's much easier to do here and a little more fleshed out, but it still feels like I want more of it because they're not overwhelmingly powerful and there's not enough variety. But still, great start. I love the concept. The duration cards, which are somewhat new to me. I think I played with a couple of them when I played with Seaside before. That's where they had previously originally showed up. They're back now, and those are also fantastic. I might make the argument that a couple of them are too fantastic. The Hireling card especially, in one of the games we played, that was out and everyone bought them up. And whoever was unlucky enough to not have the money for it at the right time and ended up with none of them, which one player did in our game, was screwed. That to me is probably a bad sign. I think the best setup you can have for Dominion is where there's multiple different cards that are really good and everyone can go down their own paths and have at least a reasonable chance of doing pretty well. I mean, that's what people love about Dominion, is that it's how you play, not necessarily what's in play. But I think a card like the Hireling, as fun as it is, and I love the idea of it, is way too good. And I don't like it when there's cards like that everyone is just clamoring for. I like cards that seem really powerful, but might have some questionableness to them. A good example of that is the Treasure Trove card, which is not like something new mechanically in this game, but it's just a new card that's in there that's really interesting because, okay, you get 2 money and you get a gold for free. and you get a copper. At a certain point, you are loading yourself down with copper. So then you have to work on combos. So take cards like, I didn't show it on camera, but the Storyteller card, which lets you get rid of, lets you basically spend money cards in order to draw more cards. So that's what you do to get rid of your coppers, or buy more trash cards if you can. Or the events, which lets you, some of them which will let you trash cards. So it really, when you have interesting cards like that that are not objectively good, but can be good when played with the right cards, I think that is the heart and soul of Dominion. And going back to the event cards, I think those are really interesting. Not necessarily my favorite new thing of the game, and I could probably take them or leave them. I think if I was playing with brand new people who weren't gamerly gamers or had no experience with deck building games at all, I probably would not play with them, but it was okay with my group. It's not that they're that much more complicated, but I think you have enough to worry about with the Kingdom cards, especially if you're new to this set, because so many things are different, or at least feel different and new. So there's just a ton of fun stuff in this set. I really like the duration cards. I really like the reserve cards. And you know, there's some fiddliness here. And like I said, it's not this isn't necessarily the beginner set, the first expansion you want to get, because of the complicated stuff that's in it and all the different tokens and the journey tokens. It's not super complicated, but it's just enough to maybe go for a different expansion instead. But when you're ready for it, it's great. And I gotta say, it's pulling me back into Dominion. It's making me want to try some of the expansions I haven't tried before. And I think it's just a solid set for a solid game that is definitely one that I'm willing to give a second look to. That is the Dominion Adventures expansion for, what else? Dominion.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.